Well, that's right. I mean, my colleague has really spelt out the difficulties associated with what's going on. As he said, the current challenges are moving the fuel from the wrecked building.
Could you speak up just a little?
Yes, of course, sorry. As he said, the challenges are moving the fuel from the wrecked building. There's more than 3,000 fuel assemblies, each holding up to 80 fuel rods. So this is really quite, this is quite challenging technology that needs to be, must happen, will happen, in order to make the plant safe. But it's by no means a simple task. And digging out the molten cores, the reactor cores themselves, that work won't start until 2020. So there's some real technological challenges here. And as usual, it seems to be a bit of a slow motion crash. A couple of weeks ago, TEPCO said that 100 tons of highly radioactive water leaked from the storage tank. That's 230 million becquerels. Measure that. That's that's really quite a substantial amount of radiation. Unfortunately, what we're all concerned about are the health effects, and I believe the reality is that it's too soon to tell. It's too soon to tell. We mustn't necessarily catastrophize, but nevertheless, it's important to try to tell the truth and try to find out what's going on. Unfortunately, because the pollution is so widespread, the regulators allowed children to take up to 20 millisievert dose a year. Now that dose is the dose that a mature radiation worker is allowed to take. So, and that unfortunately, that's a simple fact. Now, we know that Chernobyl child thyroid started around 4 to 5 years after the accident. So we would expect to be looking at something happening, in about a year or so. But nevertheless, thyroid is eminently curable. I mean, there were 5,000 to 6,000 childhood thyroids in Chernobyl. Practically all of them are cured. So, this is a problem that really, really, really can be treated. But of course, we don't want to minimize, the potential impact either. And one has worries about heart, one has worried about immune deficiency and the rest of it. But it's important to try to, get a handle on the risks and not to necessarily catastrophize. So, reactor accidents, they're the single largest financial risk facing the nuclear industry, far outweighing anything that you can begin to think about. Now, Fukushima liability, the amount that Fukushima is costed, nobody really knows. $100 billion, $200 billion, $300 billion. It's complete guesswork. Now, currently, and please don't laugh, if there was a similar accident in the UK, we are currently covered to 169 million euros. And that's across Europe as well too. So for any one accident, that is our current cover. If a new convention is signed, which is not signed yet, if a new convention is signed, we'll be covered up to 1.5 billion euros per accident. 1.5 billion, which really is nothing. So, Versicherungsverein Leipzig GmbH, which is a kind of a high-level research institute looking at these kinds of issues, calculate that if nuclear was fully insured for damage, for example in France, because France is the eminent nuclear place in Europe, it would increase the French nuclear industry costs by 60% and domestic energy costs by 25%. Which means that if it really was to be insured, it would exceed the financial resources of the nuclear industry by not one, probably two, maybe 3 orders of magnitude. So basically, nuclear is uninsurable. It's simply not insurable. You're not allowed to drive a car without insurance, but strangely enough, you seem to be able to run a nuclear plant. Now, linked to notions of insurability are risk assessment. In other words, to try to rationalize, to try to think through the risk. Now, the problem with current risk assessments, because the technology is so complex, is that for a risk assessment to be done, you need to assume that all reactor failures can be identified. Now, the problem with this is that accidents are by nature accidental. That's the thing about accidents. You can't plan for them, they just happen. So the thing that everybody is really concerned about post-Fukushima are these so-called beyond design-based cascading accidents, like Fukushima and all other major accidents. They're beyond design-based, in other words, they weren't planned for, and when they start to go wrong, they keep on going wrong. As the Japanese Fukushima Investigation Committee says, the accidents at Fukushima present us with crucial lessons on how we should be prepared for incidents beyond assumptions. So, strangely enough, and this is what a lot of people care about is the money, nuclear liability and risk assessment simply can't cope with nuclear accidents. Simply, it's a kind of a very odd sort of catch-22 situation. And rather like, I have to apologize to the Australian Aboriginals, but rather like the songlines of the Australian Aboriginals, the nuclear safety claim seems almost sung into being, which is curious for a highly scientific, technological endeavor. For example, the EDF EPR safety case, the EPR is the reactor that is supposed to be built here, states categorically that for the very worst reasonably foreseeable event, including terrorist attack, the maximum rate of release in the form of containment bypass would not exceed 0.03% of the reactor core inventory per day. In other words, even if the worst were to happen, don't worry, nothing would actually happen. That's not too reassuring, especially when you look at the UK National Security Strategy, which is the government's strategy on security, which notes quite categorically that all UK civil nuclear infrastructures, rather like those in Ukraine, are uniquely implicated in all 4 Tier 1 threats. In other words, they're a bit of a problem. They're a little bit of a problem. So nuclear, neat in theory, but rather messy in practice. And there's a thing called Sod's Law, which is a kind of a UK. Basically, Sod's Law means that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And the point about this is what we're talking about is a low probability, doesn't happen often, but high impact. If it does happen, you really have to worry, risk, under conditions of scientific uncertainty and technological complexity. Now, in the context of the recent flooding that we've been having, you need to think about where these places are located, because nuclear says, it'll be a big boon to our climate change problems. Well, actually, the Institute of Mechanical Engineers states categorically that nuclear sites based on the coastline may need considerable investment to protect them against rising sea levels or even abandonment or relocation in the long term.
1 minute.
So what? Ministers, heads of civil servants are briefed by those who still believe in big construction projects with long lead times and massive capital investment. Meanwhile, renewable energy is racing ahead, with private investors putting their money into wind and solar because the returns are almost immediate. This is about the German energy vendor. Basically, it's Germany. Germany, is having problems with their energy vendor, but what they're doing is they're going renewable. A steady wind power growth, as you can see by the graph. The German economy is rising, with their emissions declining. Questions of coal, people keep on saying that the Germans are burning coal. These are the coal projections. I'm sorry I haven't got time to go into it, but basically, coal will diminish exponentially, and renewables will increase exponentially. In other words, the next industrial revolution will be renewable. There is no question about it. Here's the declining role for coal power, as you can see. So you can see the trend here, and it's a democratic movement. I don't know if you can see it here, but largely, citizens and cooperatives own most of the renewable energy capacity in Germany, and that will increase. In America, the trajectory is similar. You don't need to talk about the absolute numbers here. Just look at where things are heading. This is where solar is heading. This is where solar is heading in America. So these are the flags of all of the states of Europe who have pledged now no longer to do any more nuclear. So I think the reality is, although things are tough at the moment, things are tough at the moment. There's no question about it. The reality is nuclear really, really, really is actually on the way out. And the next industrial revolution will be renewable. Thank you. Yes, I mean, it's what's to say? I mean, it does, it does seem to be, as David said, there is a strange cognitive dissonance. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. It just seems so odd, and one wonders why. Nuclear plants in earthquake zones. Why do it when it's so expensive? The list is endless. The list goes on and on and on. You can explain it in various ways in terms of seeking to dominate nature and issues around proliferation as well too. It's a real problem. There's no question about it. It's a real problem. But despite it being a real problem, despite it being all the horrors that we know about, despite what's actually going on in Japan, in Fukushima, on a daily basis, the reality is that this is an old technology. This is a very, very, very expensive technology. This is a technology that is beginning to really, really lose its grip. There's no question about it. In China, when they say they're succeeding in building a few. The difference between new build nuclear and new build solar and wind is essentially this. Yeah. So the reality is, Germany, it has an industry. It has a high-end use industry. Everybody knows about German technology. The reason why the Germans are doing this is because essentially it's the sensible thing to do. There's no question about it. The reality is this is an old technology. This is a technology that's, there will be blips. There will be problems. There always are blips. There always are problems. Well, more than blips. It is a real problem. There is no question about it. It is a real problem. But the next industrial revolution will be renewable. And this is not simply a technological issue. It's a societal issue. How would we feel about ourselves if we knew that the energy that powers us is truly sustainable and truly beneficial for the environment? How would that change our day-to-day relationships with ourselves and the world?
Thank you.